Make yourself a cup of tea, fellas. This one's going to be a long one. Cramp balls, also known as coal fungus, are easily identifiable by their charcoal-like appearance. Often found attached to dead fallen trees, this fungus is a valuable fire-making tool. Break the fungus in half to reveal its dusty, dry core, and it will catch a spark that's thrown from it from a fire still, which will then begin to smoulder into a burning hot ember. Another fungus that has similar uses is horse's hoof fungus, identifiable by its horse hoof-like appearance. The layer on top of the fungus, just below the outer skin, is quite fibrous and will catch a spark and smoulder for a long time, so you can either use it to ignite flammable materials, or you could use it as a portable fire lighter if you need to transfer a fire to another location. Split the tip of a stick down the middle about 5 inches deep and stuff as much birch bark in between the two sections as you can. Now you have a signal torch that will light quickly when you need it, if you need to run out into the tree line and wave it about to catch the attention of an approaching aircraft, vehicle or ship. The bark from birch trees is a great tinder. It catches sparks if processed down into thin wispy strips, so gather as much as you can for easy peasy fire starting. You may have some difficulty igniting birch bark with sparks if it's coming from a dead, fallen, rotten tree, as it may have lost a lot of the resinous oil that makes it so flammable. One way to get over this hurdle is to scrape the surface of the birch bark with your knife and throw your sparks at the dusty residue it leaves behind. You can use a pencil sharpener to gather fine wood shavings. The inside of twigs should be dry on a rainy day. It makes getting a fire going in wet weather much easier. The seeds from a thistle plant are a great tinder as well. Thistle plants are often found in abundance, clumped close together to one another, so you can gather as much as you can for future use. You may walk past feathers all the time without giving them much thought, but the fluffy young feathers do burst into flames when hit with a spark. Pro tinder. Dead pine needles are also amazing for getting your fire going. The forest floor should be littered with them all year round. Pine resin is often found encrusted into the bark of a pine tree, and while it carries some healing medicinal properties, which I'll cover later, it can be used in fire making. Crushing the resin blocks into small granules and powder will increase its chance of igniting. You may find the pine resin in a gooey, sticky, glue-like form, and that's fine, that just means it's fresh, but it's still flammable. Melting the pine resin down will reduce it into a wet, gloopy glue that you can use to make primitive tools or patch a hole in the shelter. Fatwood is another name for the heartwood of the pine tree. Fatwood has that same flammable pine resin deeply soaked into the wood, so for that reason thin shavings and sawdust from fatwood are often very flammable and enough to catch a spark. Placing living green plant or tree matter such as pine or spruce boughs over a fire will transform your fire into a signal fire. The living green materials create large plumes of thick, dense white smoke. Don't just insulate your shelter, insulate yourself. Stuff your clothes with dried grass and leaves to trap your body heat in. It's worth packing a sandwich bag and a straw into your kit. Gather some water in a bag, drop a water purification tablet in, then bada bing bada boom, drink it through the straw. A little lifesaver. Alternatively, you can use a condom. Water can be gathered by wringing out big bundles of moist moss. It won't be the nicest tasting water you've ever had, but you can gather about a litre of water in 20 minutes just from harvesting and wringing out moss if rainfall has occurred recently. Heavy dew on foliage is a great source of water. Tie rags or spare clothing around your ankles and waist and walk through the dew-covered grass before sunrise so you can wring out the water into a container. Waterproof your gear, not just your fire making materials but your compass too. Many compasses, particularly the cheap varieties, are prone to letting water in if submerged, and any excess water that could make its way into the compass could block the pins from reaching an accurate reading. It's a best practice to filter your water before you begin to purify it, as the water may contain trace particles of animal feces, toxic plants, and just general mud and grit that you don't want inside you. You can make a 3-tiered water filter by stuffing a bunch of ground up charcoal into a sock, piling sand on top of that charcoal, then stuffing grass on top of that. The grass catches the larger particles, sand catches the fine granules, and charcoal serves to absorb most chemical contaminants that may be found in the water. You can also create a makeshift canteen out of a sheet of tin foil by placing a large smooth rock or your fist into the centre of the foil, then folding up the sides around it. What you essentially have is a bowl that you can pour water into and boil by the side of a fire. Spent shotgun shells can be melted down over a fire and reshaped into a variety of different tools. One example is if you poke your knife through the melting shell, it will form a makeshift arrowhead. Trim off the excess material and stuff the hollow cavity with clay or wet mud to give it some weight. Pine cones are free kindling. Gather whatever you can find and throw them in during the beginning stages of your fire for foolproof fire fuel. Sticking 4 tent pegs into the ground makes a nifty little canteen holder that you can build a fire under and around. Make use of your space blanket by either attaching it to the inside of your shelter or use it as a fire reflector wall to make sure you get the most heat out of your fire as you possibly can. Wrap the edges of a space blanket around 2 stakes and drive it into the ground next to where you're going to make your fire. Or build a fire reflector wall out of natural materials. Drive 4 stakes into the ground in a rectangle pattern, then stack green branches on top of one another between the support stakes. This will reflect the heat back at you, which would have otherwise been lost to the wind. If you roll up the edges of a space blanket around some sticks, what you essentially have is a giant ass mirror that you can hold up and reflect the sunlight either onto the horizon or up towards an aircraft. This will be incredibly hard to miss from the air. It's a wise idea to pack various methods of man-made signal devices in your kit. Some good examples are whistles, signal flares, either handheld or rocket parachute varieties, smoke grenades, glow sticks and signal mirrors. Signal mirrors are often the most commonly included signal device in survival kits, but don't rely on it solely as your only method of signalling for rescue services. This is because the sun never travels across the north side of the sky, so you will never be able to signal to rescue services coming at you from a northern direction. However, if you have 2 signal mirrors, you could hold one mirror facing south towards the sun, which can reflect the light into the mirror facing north. Tricky business though. If you're in the northern hemisphere, when the sun is at its highest point in the middle of the sky, which we call noon, 12 PM in the summer, roughly 2 o'clock in the winter, then walking directly towards it takes you south. Rubbing raw crab apples over a wound or laceration will help to heal it, as crab apples in their raw form are quite astringent. They tighten up the skin and blood vessels around the area you apply it to. The pine resin we talked about earlier is also an effective antiseptic. Add water to granules to make an antiseptic liquid, to use externally for topical treatment, or to gurgle to combat throat, mouth or tooth infections. If found fresh off the tree while it's still gooey and wet, as opposed to solidified, then just apply it directly to the wound. Drinking untreated water in the wild runs the risk of you developing intestinal infections such as dysentery and cholera, not something you want to experience. There are certain plants and trees that can help combat the effects of these intestinal infections if you ever are unfortunate enough to contract them. Acorns and oak bark are very high in a chemical called tannic acid, which is an effective anti-diarrhea agent amongst other things, but brewing them in hot water creates a medicinal tea that combats the effects of dysentery, cholera and all manner of intestinal problems. You can also gurgle this tannic acid tea to treat ulcers, throat infections and stuff of that nature. Leaves from the blackberry plant can also be used in the same manner. The content of tannic acid is much lower, but it still does the same job. I cover this in much more detail in my video Wild Teas for Survival if you're interested in learning more about this kind of stuff. Brewing the fleshy part of the rose hips and young leaves in water creates a mild constipation relief, opposite end of the spectrum. The fleshy outer part of the fruit is edible and contains a lot of vitamin C. Dandelion tea also creates a mild constipation relief. The whole plant is edible too. Snow blindness is a condition caused by the sun's ultraviolet rays reflecting off the snow and into your bare eyes. The symptoms of snow blindness are a sensation of grit in the eyes, pain when making eye movements, red and teary eyes and a headache that intensifies with continued exposure. Prolonged exposure to these rays can result in permanent eye damage. This is why snowboarders and skiers always wear UV protection goggles. You can prevent this condition by smearing some charcoal under your eyes to reduce glare, and it also absorbs a lot of light. This is the same reason why American footballers smear dark material under their eyes. It's not just for intimidation, it's to help absorb the glare from all the light of the stadium. Or alternatively, you can cut thin eye holes in a piece of bark, run some paracord through it and wear it like sunglasses. High levels of swag. Right there. Also, pro tip, eating snow and ice will reduce your core body temperature and your body will work overtime burning calories to process the cold water. If possible, melt the snow and warm it up before you drink it. Dock leaf sap contains a natural antihistamine. Chew on the leaf for a few seconds, then rub the saliva dock mixture over a sting or bite to relieve the itching and discomfort. Dock leaves are often found on the hedge line, the tree line, and quite conveniently, usually not too far away from patches of stinging nettles. Stripping the inner bark from a willow tree, then steeping it in water or chewing on it provides you with an effective way to alleviate the symptoms of cold and fever, but most importantly it's an effective pain reliever, as the inner bark of a willow tree contains salicin, which is closely related to the active ingredient in aspirin. Don't consume willow bark if you're allergic to aspirin, by the way. Cattails are a plant found in wetlands, marshes, swamps and ponds. Inside the sausage-like seed pod, there's thousands of tiny fluffy seeds that can be used as tinder for ignition from a fire still, much like the thistle seeds we spoke about earlier. Grinding up charcoal and adding a few drops of water to the remains serves as a makeshift toothpaste. The charcoal particles are abrasive enough to clean your teeth, but not abrasive enough to damage them. If you're running low on food, then it's best to wait until night time to eat your food. Your body's going to be burning a lot of calories to keep you warm at night, so it's best to give your body the fuel to do that. High percentage alcohol can be used as a last resort emergency antiseptic. Products such as Everclear that are 150 proof or higher are effective at treating cuts, wounds, lacerations, burns if there's no other medical supplies available. Despite how much Bear Grylls loves it, drinking your own piss will not keep you alive or hydrate you. Drinking your own dehydrated urine will dehydrate you further because of the high salt concentration. As the great Cody Lundin once said, people don't survive because of it, they survive despite it. So, yeah. Holding paracord over a flame will begin to melt it, giving it some usage as a handy glue for a couple of seconds. Once it's melting, you have a few seconds to quickly apply it to an object, such as a hole in a tarp or attaching an arrowhead to a stick. For the ladies out there, sanitary towels make an excellent bandage, since their purpose is to, well, soak up blood. Tampons also do the trick at plugging punctures or deep wounds. They can also be used as tinder if you break it apart and expose the fine fibres. To fire hardened tools or weapons, keep it hovering over the fire without burning it. The moisture will evaporate, which results in your weapon or tool being a lot more durable. Placing some duct tape or a piece of birch bark over the rim of a freshly boiled canteen full of water will reduce the chance you suffer minor burns to your lips. Placing some tin foil over the top of your canteen will allow the water to boil quicker, so you can save time and resources. If your canteen comes with a matching cup, then whack that over the top of it. A scrunched up ball of tin foil can be used as a cookware cleaner to scrape off all the dry food matter that's prone to moulding. Another testament to how useful tin foil really is. Including a couple of trash bags into your kit doesn't take up much space at all, but they're worth their weight in gold. Stuff dead leaves and dry grass inside of it, tie it off and use it as a padded bed. They can also be made into emergency shelters, ponchos, bivy bags, collect rainwater, or just be used as a moisture barrier to keep you off the damp ground. A keffiyeh is a very versatile multi-purpose piece of equipment that shouldn't be overlooked. It acts as a tourniquet, bandage, water filter, sunshade, firewood carrier and a bug net. Including some duct tape into your survival kit gives you some cordage for emergency shelters, but most importantly they can patch up any holes in tarps or shelters, worth its weight in gold. Foil space blankets aren't just useful for cold weather emergencies, it also has its uses in extremely hot weather environments too. If your space blanket has both reflective and non-reflective surface, then have the reflective side facing outwards and it will reflect the sun's heat back into the air, keeping you cooler. You should insulate your shelters with natural materials. Layers of pine, spruce or fir branches make a decent bed to insulate you from the cold ground. Aside from being one of the best fire making materials out there, stripping off large strips of bark from a fallen or wrecked birch tree will provide you with a makeshift roof tile. Incorporate them into a natural shelter to give yourself a cascading waterproof layer. Gather a little bit of water into a condom, manipulate it into a ball, and you have yourself a makeshift magnifying glass. You can use it to ignite fine tinder on a sunny day if you have no other ignition tools. You may finally find some use for the dusty old condom you've had in your wallet since high school. Guitar strings can be used as pretty effective snares to catch small game. Rat traps are often overlooked in survival kits, but they're worth their weight in gold. Much more effective and foolproof than the typical paracord or brass wire snare traps. Tie them off to a tree so a stubborn animal doesn't go running off with its new hat. A red sky in the morning is often an indication of an approaching storm. While the storm may conclude before it reaches you, it's still worth consideration, as you may want to hunker down for a bit longer, instead of leaving camp and being caught in a storm. Pack toilet paper if you get the chance, bros. You don't want to have to wipe that ass on a pine cone. I cover many of these tips in greater detail in individual videos, so feel free to check out my content to get a better understanding of some of the things I covered here. Thanks for watching, fellas.